Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. We are here first in history who Christians and Muslims believe to be a prophet of God. His life has been the center of the Muslim-Christian discussions and debate for more than a millennium now. The New Testament of the Bible talks about Jesus through us, making occasional references to Jesus in its text, while one chapter in it is titled Mary, the mother of Jesus, peace be upon him. Tonight, we will be asking questions about Jesus, trying to go through layers to find out where the historical Jesus lies, in the Bible or the Qur'an. We can be sure that both the books are not right, because they do contradict in details they present, and hence it becomes a topic of debate for both the religions. For discussion on this, we have two speakers with us today, Jerriton, Brewin, and Saaib, Ahmed, Rabbani. A Christian speaker for this discussion is Jerriton. He is a medical student from India. He is involved in Christian apology. Sheikh Inamullah, who is the founder and president of QDCI, Qur'an Quranic Da'wah Center International, Lahore, Pakistan. This was the debate that has landed the two speakers in this discussion. The debate can be found in YouTube under the heading Jesus Crucifixion, Fact or Conjecture. We request you to stop distracting the speakers on the text by commenting. So we request you to listen to what the speakers and the moderator have to say. For this discussion, our Muslim speaker is Saaib Ahmed Rabbani from Kashmir. Saaib is doing his BTech from Sharda University and Bachelor's in Philosophy from Indira Gandhi National Open University. He writes on religions, politics, and history. You can read his articles and critical reviews on his subject, saibahmed.com. His views about things are peculiar in one way or the other, and hence his presence in this discussion is interesting on how his views will be received by both Christians and Muslims. So now let's get on with the discussion in hand. First, I will be asking Jerriton about the previous debate. So please tell us your background. First, tell us your background and how you got yourself involved in Christian Muslim apologetics. Mic to you, Jerriton.
Yes, thank you. Before I begin, I start off by thanking Brother Habeeb and Brother Saaib Ahmed for having me here. Well, I am basically a medical student doing my undergraduate course in a medical college in southern India. And my journey into Christian apologetics began after I finished my schooling. I still remember the day when one of my friends told me during the school days that in the beginning God created us, and then later on people have created God. And although I saw that to be logically inconsistent, that actually began to ignite the spark in me to ask the deep questions in life, the meaning of existence, the truth of the Christian worldview, the fate of mankind, and so forth. And so in my search for answers, I began studying the Bible and other religious texts as well. However, my love for studying the Bible increased from then on, and that has been my substantial area of concentration, of course, apart from my academic studies. And I found that Christianity offers the only hand to the world that is lost in darkness, and it has ever since been my passion to give reasons as to why I think that way, which is what has landed me here. Thank you.
Since Habeeb has crashed, I'll continue with the discussion. I got the questionnaire with me right now. So I'll continue with this debate, and I'll be asking Jerriton the first question, which Mr. Moderator Habib was going to ask. You recently had a debate with Sheikh Inamullah Mumtaz, and that's what landed us here. The debate is available on YouTube for you people to go through. For you, Jerry, that was your first time to have an official recorded debate, right? Can you tell us about the debate briefly? Thank you. Over to you, Jerriton.
Well, yes, thank you, Brother Saaib. On August 3, 2013, I had a debate with Sheikh Inamullah Mumtaz, who happens to be a Muslim apologist from Pakistan. And initially, though, we had met on Facebook and had discussed about Christianity and Islam for quite a long period of time. And he had uploaded a book that he had written about Christianity to Facebook, which is titled Paulinity. And that title was quite provocative because it implied that it was the Apostle Paul and not Jesus who was the real founder of Christianity. Well, actually, this was the popular opinion among people until the 1970s. But unfortunately for critics of Christianity, the publication of the scholar E.P. Sanders' book titled Paul and Palestinian Judaism, which came out in 1977, signaled the death blow to that popular opinion. Today, the idea that Paul was the real founder of Christianity has largely been abandoned in contemporary New Testament scholarship. Anyway, that aside, when I read through Mr. Mumtaz's book, I found out that his arguments were mostly copy-pastes from the late Sheikh Ahmed Didat, another Muslim apologist who Muslims often know and quote. And his arguments against Christianity have been laid to rest ever since he had spelled them out. But nevertheless, Mr. Mumtaz was advancing his arguments and was even claiming that Christians have never been able to answer any of his objections. And so I felt the need to address his arguments and refute them. And so the debate was arranged between both of us on the crucifixion of Jesus in Skype audio, as Brother Saaib mentioned, and it was uploaded to YouTube. Now, in the debate, however, Mr. Mumtaz never attempted to make his arguments really clear. But we had a post-debate discussion in Skype where he revealed how he reads the crucifixion narratives in the Bible and how he concludes that the whole crucifixion scenario is a conjecture. And so, having heard his full review, I created a response video, and I think I'll be uploading it this week. And that video will be titled Jesus Crucifixion, Fact or Conjecture, Jerriton's Post-Debate Response. So make sure you look at that on YouTube as well. And there I offer a thorough criticism of Mr. Mumtaz's quite laughable, I should say, arguments against Christianity. But to summarize just the response here, I have divided my response into 4 headings. First, the interpretation of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 44, which he advances the argument that Paul somehow believed in a non-physical resurrection of the spirit. That I will be addressing there. And secondly, the meaning of the resurrection and its relevance to the crucifixion. Here I provide evidence from a standard Jewish encyclopedia called Encyclopedia Judaica, and I also provide evidences from the Bible to say that resurrection, both in Paul and in the Gospels, meant the revival of the corpse to glory and immortality and not becoming a bodiless spirit. These are relevant to crucifixion because after Mr. Mumtaz allegedly shows that resurrection means you are simply a ghost, he then goes to Luke chapter 24, where Jesus says that he is not a spirit, and then concludes that Jesus was therefore not resurrected, and neither was he crucified. And so I criticize his arguments in that response. The third one that I address is the crucifixion of Jesus itself. And here I talk about what I have called Mr. Mumtaz's exchange theory, where in that theory he maintains that, of course this is common to Muslims as well, he maintains that someone else took the place of Jesus and was crucified instead of the real Jesus. And here I provide a parallel second exchange theory where I argue, using his same logic, that on the cross a second exchange took place where that someone else was removed and the real Jesus was put back on the cross. And then lastly, I addressed the point of contradictions. This was the main thrust in his debate with me, and he believes that pointing to a few peripheral contradictions in the gospel, and he could say that that's all a conjecture. But I've addressed it in my debate, showing that contradiction does not mean that something is a conjecture. A conjecture is a conclusion that is based on insufficient evidence. And as I pointed out in my debate, there is more than sufficient evidence for Jesus' crucifixion. So make sure you listen to that post-debate video also. Thank you.
All right, this was Jerriton Brewin for you. As long Habeeb is not back in, I'm going to moderate this debate as well because I am the admin of this room. As long as Habeeb is not here, I'll be continuing. This was Jerriton Brewin's introduction to this about his debate with Inamullah Mumtaz, which you can find on YouTube under the.
Am I on the mic now? No, sorry for that. I went into the other room. I mean the respectful debate room, and I took the mic and started speaking over there by mistake from my phone, and was not welcome there, of course. Okay, fine. Let's get going. That's why it's difficult to manage 2 or 3 things at the same time. Anyways, now we heard from Jerriton about his debate and the experience. He well talked about the conjecture, and let's hear from him more in the upcoming questions. Now I'd like to bring Saaib into the discussion here. So I have told you about you writing from a various range of topics, from religion to politics, history and all other stuffs which just comes randomly up to your head. So what exactly is your field of interest, if I may ask, and how is this much interest in Christianity and interfaith discussions? Go ahead, mic is free.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? All right. I would always like any discussion which I am in to start with this question about who I am, what work do I do, and what my field of study is. And once I answer these questions, another question that emerges is that of my comments on religion and all. On the onset, I would like to clear it to my audience, whosoever is listening to this discussion and whosoever will listen to it in future, that I am not a Muslim apologist or a da'i. I am like any other Muslim who you see walking down the road with jeans and t-shirts on. The only difference is that I know my religion, I know my faith, and I am a Muslim not by the accident of birth, but because of choice. Many people undergo the crisis of faith during a particular stage of life, and I too underwent one. Call the Saaib Ahmed of that phase an agnostic, maybe a reluctant one. This was the phase where I had a choice to make. One, go deeper into atheism, or two, study religion and other than Islam. Normally what people do in such a situation is going deeper into atheism. Some study their own religion and some study all religions. I had already studied the basics of Islam and I chose studying other religions. I started with Hinduism. The very beginning of my study of Hinduism showed me the strength of Islamic theology. But it was not until I came across Ahmed and Zakir Naik. And yeah, it seemed interesting. I had Choice on my bookshelf, Choice, Ahmed book. I started studying Islamic Christianity, and more I studied about Islamic Christianity, the more I got satisfied about the truth of Islam. I have always been a rational person and a critique by nature. That helped me a lot in my studies. That was the religion part. I come from South Kashmir town of Islamabad. The state has been in turmoil for decades now. I always felt a need to change the mindset of Kashmiris, and later this passion turned me into Muslims as a whole. And I began studying, writing, and talking about politics and history. The love for Muslims and the Muslim Ummah is what has dragged me into all this. Such is the glorious past of ours that it really hurts to see the current backwardness of the Ummah. And to talk to Muslims and to other people of other faith, you have to know what their faith is. And that's why I study religion. That was about me. Over to you, Habeeb.
Thank you, Saaib, for telling us about yourself and how you came into religion and similar topics. Saaib Ahmed, I have seen you posting in Facebook about, commenting on the debate between Jerriton and Sheikh Inamullah. So please tell us why do we have to discuss the same topic once again and what is the relevance of it? What are we trying to prove the audience or what are we trying to prove? Mic is free.
Can you hear me? Can you people hear me? Okay. Yes, I did go through the debate. Brother Inamullah had contacted me prior to his engagement with Jerriton, and I had given him a couple of suggestions. That made me follow the debate, and once it was published on YouTube, I downloaded it to go through. To be frank enough, clear and straightforward, it's clear from the debate that Brother Inamullah, with all due respect, had not come prepared, while Jerriton was even quoting Inamullah's books during his entire debate. We must appreciate Jerry's preparations. Most of the time in his debate, Jerry used the wrong approach but a correct methodology. The method of a historian was correct, but was that what was needed from him? No. We will discuss that later, what he should actually have talked about. In contrast to this, Brother Inamullah used typical Ahmed Deedat and Zakir Naik kind of polemics. My personal taste makes me dislike polemics, and that's why I found no reason to appreciate Brother Inamullah's presentation, while I did find Jerry's to be good. Moreover, such arguments are outdated. Inamullah did nothing or less to improve upon them so as to look stronger, while Jerriton was already anticipating such methodology. And what makes a good debater is his skills of anticipating beforehand what his opponent is going to say and what his responses can be. For a student of historical Jesus, yes, Jerry's presentation is worth going through. On the onset, the topic is not worth debating, and there are two reasons for that. One, to check the certainty of an event, historians will use their own methods, which will lead to a conclusion that Jesus was indeed crucified, hence debating the issue is futile. Second, the Quranic position is such that it also cannot be refuted. Quran acknowledges that some kind of crucifixion might have happened, but it was not Jesus who was crucified. It is like all evidence points to a crucified Jesus, and God comes with the clarification that it wasn't Jesus. It is like the story of Aisha, where she lost her necklace. Certain stories began to make rounds across Medina. Evidence was pointing towards something unacceptable, and here came the clarification from God Himself, and the matter was settled. For a Muslim, denying crucifixion is only on the basis of Quran's divine origin. God says it, I believe it, and that settles for me. If he is going to debate it as a historian, he is bound to fail. Yes, theological arguments can be made, and there are some interesting theological arguments against crucifixion which we might discuss as we go on. Brother Inamullah did make a few in his debate as well. You can go through the debate to check his arguments. That's it from me. Over to you, Habib.
Now we have heard from Saaib. Is there voice? We have heard from Saaib and his background in the Christian-Muslim discussions and his various topics that he's interested in, and he has given a very brief analysis of the debate between Jerriton and Inamullah Mumtaz. Let's see how his way of answering would be in the upcoming questions. Now let's engage you both. My first question to Saaib would be as follows. Now before we dive deeper into the topic and the Qur'an and the Bible, it seems that Muslims have not accepted or they are not ready to accept the way of modern critical scholarship works. What do you say about the role of modern scholarship in the studies of religion for a layman, for any man like you and me, not scholars? How does textual criticism, and what is it? How does textual criticism of Quran and Bible help, or the question, for a historical Jesus, and for that matter Muhammad, of course? What about history and religion? Do you think it's a conflict, or are they conciliating?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Yes, Habib, you are correct to some extent that Muslims are yet to accept modern critical scholarship. It seems like Muslims see all non-Muslim work with suspicion. The reason for the same is the way Orientalists have worked on Islam. The jaundiced Orientalists always have had an axe to grind. Their hostile literature has created this gap. But then this should not be the reason that we keep ourselves away from recent developments into the study of religion. There seems to be one more reason for the same. Muslims tend to rest their thesis more on earlier scholars than the later and the modern ones. Earlier the Muslim scholar, more is the respect he earns among us the Muslims. Maybe this is the reason that they are not that much open to recent developments. I would also like to mention here that Muslims have acquired that part of recent scholarship which they feel is attractive. These include Professor Keith Morey's thesis or Dr. Maurice Bouquet's and others like Bart Ehrman. Sometimes what seems favorable to them is taken and the hostile part is rejected. Some quotations and books and persons have become household names among us the Muslim apologists. I also feel that Muslims do tend to go to modern critical scholars when it comes to study of Christianity. Professor Bart Ehrman, who happens to be my favorite as well, is almost a celebrity among Muslims. Quotations from his books can be seen in almost each and every apologetic Muslim literature. The idea that modern scholarship and religion are in conflict is wrong. In my study, I have mostly read modern critical scholars, and that's what has brought me back into faith. As a Muslim, let me be clear that there is nothing in modern scholarship which can cause any serious damage to any of the established part of Islam, while many of the Christian beliefs do get compromised, be it history, science, or any other field. Take the example of textual criticism. The belief of a perfectly preserved inerrant Bible believed to be written by prophets and apostles is at best laughable now. Textual criticism of Bible has unveiled many hidden truths about the Bible. Meanwhile, the same textual criticism of Quran leads to a result which is perfectly acceptable to Muslims. But textual criticism of Quran is again that something which Muslims seem to be viewing with suspicion. But the reality is that Al-Itqan or Kitab al-Mashaif are example of classical literature on the subject written by Muslims. We have always been open to research. What I find is that modern scholarship is only attesting to Islam's claims. Even in history, the details in which Bible and Quran differ, we see facts supporting Quranic version of stories. The example of Haman or the title of pharaohs and kings in Egypt are noteworthy in this respect. Yes, for a layman, these things might not matter, but at a big stage like this, in a discussion like this, there can be brought into discussion things which a layman can't even understand. At the end of the day, such things only matter to scholars and those who research. That's it from my side. Over to you, Habib.
Thank you, Saaib. I would like to tell the audience to refrain from posting on the text which could potentially distract the speakers from speaking. If you have any questions, you may well ask after the discussion is over, either in this room or personally. Thank you very much. Now let's go to Jerriton here. Think about what Saaib said, especially about the textual criticism part. And how does it go in hand with your studies? Is it again a conflict, as the question was posed before, or do you think there is a conciliation between the two?
Yes, regarding the textual criticism, Brother Saaib Ahmed mentioned Bart Ehrman, and I would agree that Bart Ehrman is very popular among Muslims, and his arguments can be found in many papers and debates throughout the world. And since you've mentioned Bart Ehrman, I would like to quote what Ehrman says about the New Testament textual criticism. This is what Ehrman says in his book, Misquoting Jesus. To quote him word for word, quote, "Essential Christian doctrines are not affected by the manuscript variants of the New Testament," end quote. And that would include our topic for today's discussion, which is the crucifixion of Jesus. And Ehrman himself knows that the text of the New Testament has been reconstructed to more than 96% accuracy. So the textual criticism of the New Testament is not a problem. Regarding modern scholarship, when it comes to the Bible, it does play a significant role for the layperson and as an individual and the church as a whole. You see, the part of the problem with evangelical Christianity of today is that people base their whole understanding of who Jesus is on their spiritual experience. To give just one example, Rick Warren and Joel Osteen have become so popular in the evangelical cycle today. But if you just look at what they preach, their preaching has drawn criticisms even from adamant, radical, left-wing New Testament scholars who are atheists, such as Robert Price. I'm sure Brother Saaib Ahmed will be knowing about him. Robert Price believes that the historical Jesus did not even exist. And this is what he says in his book, Top Secret, The Truth Behind Today's Pop Mysticisms. Price says, God in this system begins to slip away from being a father, a king, a person, towards being a vague cloud of positive energy upon which we draw by using certain techniques. Despite the talk about God, it is really a matter of training the mind to expect and attract what we want in life. End quote. And such preaching, says Price, is, to quote his words, only cosmetically theological, and the gospel they preach is virtually all sheer assertion with only ornamental scriptural citations. End quote. And this is, even in scholarship, scholars have created Jesus in their own image. The Jesus Seminar is one example. And so I think that it is vitally important that we rediscover who the historical Jesus is by genuine scholarship and not let other people paint Jesus in their own image. Thank you.
Let's continue ahead into the essential part of the debate. The question is for Jerriton. And why do you think, as a Christian, affirming the crucifixion of Jesus is important to you? Mic is free.
Well, yes, sure, Brother Saaib. Perhaps the most important reason why the crucifixion of Jesus is important, not just for Christians but also for the whole world, is because of the theological significance it carries. Over the centuries, both Christians and non-Christians have created what can be called caricatures of the cross, with an angry God up there and an innocent Jesus down here, trying to appease his violent father by taking God's wrath upon himself. However, when you read the New Testament, you don't get a picture like that at all. I've actually created a video which is titled, Why Did Jesus Die? A fresh insight into the meaning of Jesus' sacrifice, and I'll be uploading it this week and in YouTube. And there I explain the meaning of Jesus' death in a fresh way. And I can only summarize a few points here. Perhaps the best way to see the cross is to use the Christus Victor model of the atonement. There is a key little passage in Colossians chapter 2 verse 15 where Paul says that God has stripped the principalities and powers. He has publicly exposed them and he has led them in a triumphant procession, defeating them on the cross. And so it is a model of God defeating the forces of evil on the cross. And another important element to be kept in mind before understanding Jesus' death is the New Testament vision of eschatology. According to the Bible, the vision of the future is not about going to heaven when we die. It is about bringing the life of heaven to earth. It is about healing the world from evil, violence, sickness, death, and decay. And the crucifixion of Jesus was that cosmic point at which all the wickedness, evil, shame, and death converged, and Jesus in the middle, exhausting all its force, like a tornado, absorbing everything in itself, and then destroying them to pieces. And this enabled the launch of new creation at Jesus' resurrection. So that is why affirming the crucifixion of Jesus is important, not just for Christians, but also for the whole world. Thank you.
Now let's hear from Saaib. Why does the very same crucifixion, which is rather different in your ideology and the books, what is actually the Islamic point of view on the same subject? And do you hold this view to be correct, and why so?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Islam takes Jesus to be one of the messengers of God. Quran does talk about Jesus at quite a few places in a very favorable tone. Quran is not like Bible which records biographies and histories in the way humans do. Quran narrates stories to emphasize certain things. In case of Jesus, Quran tries to remove doubts related to him, thus talking about those aspects of Jesus which need clarifications. One such thing related to Jesus is his crucifixion. The Quran denies that Jesus was crucified. This happens to be the mainstream Islamic view, or that it denies Jesus' death by crucifixion, which happens to be the Ahmadiyya view. Quran says in Surah Nisa, the Jews boast, we have slain Jesus, the son of Mary. However, they did not slay him, and neither did they crucify him, but it only seemed to them so. Those who hold views thereon are indeed confused, have no real knowledge thereof, and follow mere conjecture. End quote. So you see here Quran accepts that such a claim does exist. Quran, however, doesn't give any reasons for the same, and at the same time it acknowledges that it did appear that Jesus had been crucified or that he had been killed. As a student of religion, I would like to see what reasons does Quran give for what it claims. And there you see that it doesn't give one. What reason is then there for it to make such a claim? The reason is authority. Quran speaks from authority, and the authority here is the all-knowing God. What seemed to be certain event is cleared by God to have been conjecture. The Quran says it, I believe it, that settles it. So what it rests upon is whether you accept the authority of Quran or not. The Muslim does accept its authority, while non-Muslims don't. So then how are we supposed to struggle with non-Muslims? Quran replies the questions and tells us that jihad with God's book is the best form of jihad, and that's what we are supposed to do. Quran is a standing miracle which is there for everyone to go through. Let's argue with non-believers in the way which are best and most beautiful with this standing miracle. What happens then is that we don't need to find such complex theology to fit in the crucifixion of Messiah. No original sins are required, no resurrections, no trinities at all. Let Muslims bring others on the same rope of God and make them hold on to it firmly, such that they don't get divided in future. That's it. Over to you, Habib.
Can you hear me? Well, that was very affirmative. Now let's go on further with the Jerriton. Now, Jerry, what do you think about the Muslim position of Jesus? Do you think it has any authority? And why or why not?
Well, yes. Before I give the answer to your question, Brother Habib, I would like to say that I also reject the concept of original sin, and I think that is unbiblical. With that said, with regard to the Muslim position of the crucifixion of Jesus, they are actually diverse. There are Muslims who believe that Jesus was, number one, neither crucified nor did he die. Number two, was crucified but he did not die. And number three, was not crucified but he did die. So these are the three views that Muslims hold. And the reason for such diverse and contradictory views among Muslims is because in several verses in the Quran, there are suggestions that Jesus actually did die. For example, Surah 3:55, Surah 19:33. And one verse in the Quran, which Brother Saaib Ahmed mentioned, which is very ambiguous, and that has opened the door to a variety of interpretations. And my reading of Surah 4:157 actually is not the denial of the crucifixion and death of Jesus, as Muslims have traditionally interpreted it, but rather it is the affirmation of them. The surah is only saying that the people did not do it, although it appeared to be so, but that it was God himself who was crucifying Jesus in order to vindicate him by raising him from the dead. So the Quran actually agrees with the Christian view on this point. This is my new interpretation, and let's see if Saaib Ahmed has a good refutation of it. The Quran agrees with the Christian view of the cross, that Jesus was crucified and killed on the cross. It was God's plan and not the plan of the Jews and Romans, which leaves no room for their boasting that they had killed Jesus. Thank you.
Now again to you, Jerriton. How is the Quran relevant to the study of historical Jesus? I think you said about this a bit earlier, But what kind of Jesus do you think that it presents? Do you think that it presents a Jesus which did die and which did raise up alive? You were talking about the verse of 1933. I believe that it is a verse which, in where Jesus was a baby, when he talks about being, to die and then will be raised up alive. So, what do you think that the Quran says? Does it say that he did die and then he did raise up alive? Or is it that he was not crucified nor resurrected? Your mic.
Yes, Brother Habib, I'll respond to that once Saaib Ahmed asks any questions regarding my position of what the Quran says. But to give your answer to what the Quran, how relevant the Quran is to the study of the historical Jesus, in my debate with Mr. Mumtaz, I had mentioned that one of the criteria which historians use to investigate anything in the past is the criterion of early attestation. And I should disagree with Brother Saaib Ahmed here. He mentioned that historians use their own method. That is not true. Historians use a method that is universally available to both to everyone, Jew, Christian, Muslim, and atheist. This is a universally accepted methodology. It is not a historian's own method. And that one of the criterion is the criterion of early attestation. That is to say, an event that is reported early is more likely to be true than it would have been had it been reported late. And since the documents of the New Testament are our earliest sources, naturally they become our principal sources for the study of the historical Jesus, and not the Quran, which comes 600 years after the event. And I think that Muslims would admit that on pure historical grounds, the Quran is of no benefit in the study of the historical Jesus. Extra biblical sources only help to confirm what we read in the New Testament, but they don't actually tell us anything new about the historical portrait of Jesus. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Since we heard from Jerriton, it's time for Saaib to give a response to what Jerriton said. So what merit does Quran hold to a historian when it comments on Jesus?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Before I answer the question, I would like to clarify to Jerriton. I was saying historians use their own method. That of course means that they won't use a Jew's method, a Christian's method, or a Muslim's method. We are saying the same thing in a different language. In any case, what merit does Quran hold to a historian when it comments on Jesus? I will agree with Jerriton that it's irrelevant to historians. For a historian, the Quran was written almost 600 years after the crucifixion in a language alien to Jesus, at a place where Jesus never walked. For them, Quran was authored by a person who had limited knowledge of the subject, living with people who hardly knew Jesus. For a historian, Quran would have been beneficial if it would have presented a historical argument against the crucifixion, which, sorry to say, it doesn't. Here it becomes irrelevant. The more important question is whether Quran is totally out of a historian's desk. Here we see that Quran is one of the most important documents when it comes to the study of beliefs of Arabs during the 6th and 7th century, and hints from it can be taken about what Christians of the same time used to believe. And there you see some very interesting things. Let me give you an example. We have seen a long-lasting polemic against the Quran that it gets the Trinity wrong. For historians, Quran criticizing the Trinity of God, Mary, and Jesus means that the belief of Christians surrounding Muhammad was like that. I would like to stress that Quran is not a compelling evidence for believing such a thing. But then we can take a look on other material as well. Take, for example, Ibn Hisham's Asira al-Nawawiyah. He mentions some of the beliefs of the Christians who talked to Prophet Muhammad, and I quote, "Those who talked to Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, were Abu Harith ibn al-Aqama al-Aqib, Abu Masih, and al-Ayyam al-Sad. They were Christians according to faith of the king, with differences between them. They say he is Allah, and say he is son of Allah, and say he is the third of the three. That's part of Trinity. And these are the claims of Christians. He used to raise the dead, cure the sick, create from clay bird-like structure, then breathe into it to make it a living bird. They also argue for saying that he is son of God by saying he had no known father and spake in infancy, which is something never done by any human. They use as evidence for what they claim he is a third of three. That's the part of Trinity. The argument that Allah says we did, we commanded, we created, and we judged. And whereas if he was one, he would say, I did, I judged, I commanded, and I created. But it is he, Jesus, and Mary. The Quran was revealed addressing these arguments. This is from Surah al-Nabawiyah. The miracles of Jesus speaking in infancy and giving life to birds made out of clay are usually dismissed by Christians as apocryphal, but these are perfectly acceptable to Christians in Arabia during the advent of Islam. And the Trinity they had was of God, Jesus, and Mary. So you see, we can get insights about what the Christians in Arabia used to believe and what kind of scripture did they have. This is where Quran becomes relevant in the study of Arabian Christianity. Well, in case of Jesus, for the historical Jesus, Quran is irrelevant. Thanks.
Having commented on what merit the Quran holds, can you tell us what merit does the Bible hold in relevance to the same topic?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Having talked about Quran, now I have been asked about what relevance does Bible hold. Well, Bible can be taken into consideration to some extent, but yes, it can't be relied upon. Let me tell you a few things about Bible. Do we know who the actual authors of Bible were? For majority of books, we don't know who the authors were. Is it possible that some of the authors of some of the biblical books were not in fact who they claimed or were claimed to be? Yes, it's very much possible. Most of the books of the Bible are anonymous and many are forged. When did these authors live? We don't know for most of the authors. What were the circumstances under which they wrote? We don't know. What issues were they trying to address in their own day? We don't know except for Paul's letters. How were they affected by the cultural and historical assumptions of their time? We know that they were affected by both. What sources did these authors use? Most of the authors were not eyewitnesses. We can only guess about what their sources were. What were these sources produced? When were these sources produced? We don't know. Is it possible that the perspective of these sources differed from one another? Yes, it's very much possible. Is it possible that the authors who used these sources had different perspectives both from their sources and from one another? Yes, it's very much possible. Is it possible that the books of Bible based on variety of sources have internal contradictions? Not just that it's possible, the scholarly consensus is that the various books in general and gospels in particular contradict each other every now and then. Are these contradictions irreconcilable? Yes, they are. There are many large and small but irreconcilable contradictions in the Bible. Scholars have for long known and accepted this. Is it possible that what the books originally meant in their original context is not what they are taken to mean today? This is very much the case with certain biblical passages. What historical critics have established on the basis of centuries of research is that Bible is filled with discrepancies, many of them irreconcilable contradictions. Moses did not write the Pentateuch, the first five books of Old Testament, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not write the Gospels. There are other books that did not make it to the Bible that at one time or other were considered canonical. Other Gospels, for example, allegedly written by Jesus' followers, Peter, Thomas, and Mary. The Exodus probably did not happen as described in Old Testament. The conquest of promised land is probably based on legend. The Gospels are at odds on numerous points and contain non-historical material. It's hard to know whether Moses even existed and what exactly the historical Jesus taught. The historical narratives of the Old Testament are filled with legendary fabrications, and the book of Acts in the New Testament contains historical unreliable information about the life and teachings of even Paul. Many of the books of the New Testament are pseudonyms, written not by the apostles but by later writers claiming to be apostles. The list goes on. The Bible is not reliable as a historical document, but then yes, it can be used as a document. Thanks.
Thank you, Saaib, for telling us about the merit and how much merit does Bible hold. Now, I would like Jerriton to comment on what Saaib just said.
Well, yes. Before I comment on what Brother Saaib had said, I would like to say that everything that he mentioned was only going to question the Bible being the Word of God or the inspiration of the Bible, which is not the topic of this discussion. And so I will not be answering his questions. But regarding the what the merit Bible holds, Saaib Ahmed quoted Bart Ehrman, and this is what Bart Ehrman says. If historians want to know what Jesus said and did, they are more or less constrained to use the New Testament Gospels as their principal sources. Hence, the canonical Gospels are meritorious in being our only principal sources for the life of Jesus. But how meritorious are they? Saaib Ahmed is trying to give a negative view. Well, that is actually not true. Ever since the Gospels have been established to belong to the genre of biography, particularly by the scholar Richard Burridge in his book titled What Are the Gospels? A comparison with Greco-Roman biography, and with the herald of the third quest for the historical Jesus, the dominant scholars of this new quest, third quest, include Ben Meyer, Anthony Harvey, E.P. Sanders, James D.G. Dunn, N.T. Wright, and so forth. There has been a surge in scholarship in locating Jesus and his movement within a first century eschatological backdrop, thus recognizing the Jewishness of Jesus and his early followers. And this surge in scholarship today has often been called the Jewish reclamation of Jesus. And all these have paved the way in recent years of scholarship to take the Gospels seriously. And thus the popular opinion that the Gospels are legends and myths, that that Jesus was simply a mere moral teacher of timeless truths, that the miracle stories in the Gospels are fictions, all these have largely been abandoned in New Testament scholarship. As the scholar E.P. Sanders says in his book, The Historical Figure of Jesus, quote, "We know a lot about Jesus. We know that he started under John the Baptist, that he had disciples, that he expected the kingdom, that he went from Galilee to Jerusalem, that he did something hostile against the temple, that he was tried and crucified. We know who he was, what he did, what he taught, and why he died. Perhaps most important, we know how much he inspired his followers, who were so loyal to him that they changed history." End quote. And all of this we come to know, guess what? From the Bible. And so the Bible does hold every merit in giving us the actual portrait of the historical Jesus. Thank you.
I think we have lost Habib. Let me continue with the question here till he returns back. We listened to Jerriton on his comments. We listened to his comments about what merit does Bible hold. So let's continue with Jerriton. The Quran says that those who believe that Jesus was crucified have no certain knowledge. They only follow conjectures. How would you respond to this claim, Jerriton Brewin? Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Brother Saaib. Well, the Quran actually doesn't say that those who believe that Jesus was crucified have no certain knowledge. The Quran says in Surah 4, 157 that those who believe that the Jews crucified Jesus by the Romans have no certain knowledge. The Quran is not denying the crucifixion itself. This is the key point I'm making. The Quran is not denying the crucifixion itself. It is only denying the causal agents of the crucifixion, that is, the people. And in doing so, it has opened the door to the interpretation that it was actually God himself who was the cause behind Jesus' crucifixion and death, and not the people. And thus the Quran remains true to its cause, that it is the confirmation of the previously revealed scripture, that is the Bible. Let me just read to you the translation of Surah 4, 157 to 158. It says, they said in boast, "We killed Christ Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. But they killed him not, nor crucified him. But so it was made to appear to them, and those who differ therein are full of doubts, with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow. For surely they killed him not. Rather, Allah, open bracket, caused him to die, and, close bracket, raised him to himself." And these words that I've put in the open and close brackets are actually imported from other verses of the Quran, such as Surah 354, which clearly says that Jesus actually did die. Actually, God caused his death. So this interpretation which I'm offering gives you a Jesus who has been crucified and did die on the cross. Thank you.
Saaib, how will you respond to what Jerry just said?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. I would like to comment on two things here. One on Jerry's comments on Bible, that the Bible can be taken as a text. I do accept that, and I did say that it can be taken. It is to be taken as one of the primary sources in studying Jesus. But then what I said is it is not reliable. It can be taken, but it can't be relied upon. And Bart Ehrman agrees to me on that, and most of the scholars do agree, except for conservative evangelical scholars. In any case, let me talk about his recent. In any case, let me talk about his recent this comment, the new interpretation that he gave us for the crucifixion thing. The thing here is we don't accept interpretations like this. What the interpretation, if it's a new interpretation, you have to find some backing for it in the history of Islamic tafsir writing, the commentary writing. Does Jerriton find any backing for his claims in entire Islamic literature? Have Muslims misunderstood the passage for 1400 years? This is what the question needs to be asked. He is a non-Arabic speaker, and there have been Muslims speaking Arabic for 1400 years. Did Prophet Muhammad understand the passage like this? This is what needs to be asked. Did his earliest followers read the passage like this? This is what needs to be asked. Did the earliest compilers of the Hadith treat the verses like this? This is what needs to be answered. And unfortunately, when we use this methodology, what we find is Jerriton's interpretation is quite new, and it will be rejected in any place wherever we have discussions or all, or any rational or logical person will reject it. And since no one has ever interpreted it like this, and what the interpretations of Prophet Muhammad and the earliest Sahaba are acceptable interpretations of the Quran. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Saaib, for that comment on what Jerry just said. Now, crucifixion is almost a certain event. Most secular historians agree on this. How do you, as a Muslim, respond to this, Saaib? Isn't Qur'an supposed to be going against something which, according to Jerriton, is an established fact, isn't it?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. As historians, what we try to do is building probabilities around what happened in the past. More the probability of an event, more will it be acceptable. As long as there are probabilities instead of certainties, the Muslim position isn't compromised. What I mean is, even if the crucifixion was 99.99% certain, the 0.01% that remains is enough for the Muslim position to escape through. Moreover, as I said already, Quran doesn't deny that there appeared to be some kind of crucifixion. So then, if it appeared that Jesus had been crucified, naturally the historic data will suggest the same, and historians will definitely reach the conclusion that Jesus had indeed been crucified. There is nothing special here, nor do we Muslims worry about it. Does this, however, mean that we can't build a case against crucifixion? Certainly not. Let's examine the images of Jesus as a crucified Messiah. The problem here is that crucified Messiah is clear-cut contradiction of terms. By definition, the Messiah has to be victorious over his enemies. If he is killed by the enemies, he is not the Messiah. Even the conservative evangelical scholars like J. Smith accept this. You can refer to his evidence of the resurrection. So then, what we see is that if Jesus was killed, then obviously he was not the true Messiah. If he is the true Messiah, he couldn't be crucified. The only escape for the Christians is if they argue that Jesus rose from the dead. And like they want us to prove historically the crucifixion did not happen, what I will tell them is to prove historically Jesus rose from the dead. Until such a proof is given, we surely I'm sorry, until such a proof is given, which surely they can't, will keep on believing that the idea of crucified Messiah is as self-refuting as a square circle, a four-sided triangle, or a marriage bachelor. This is what Jerriton should have concentrated more on in his debate against Inamullah. But what he does is building altogether a different case and then presenting crucifixion as an undisputed fact. But the one undisputable fact that we need to find is that he resurrected from the dead, and that this is what Jerriton should have provided evidence for. Let us briefly have a look at the evidence for the resurrection to see if there is any hope that Jerriton can persuade us that Jesus rose from dead. The gospel evidence is marked by contradiction and doubt. If we look at the earliest tried with Mark, other wrote new and improved gospels. For example, Mark supplies guards to the tomb to ensure that no one could have stolen the body. Raymond Brown says about this narrative of Matthew that if there were guards actually at the tomb, other gospels would make little sense or no sense at all. Each gospel written each gospel writer comes up with an improved version of the story, and these versions but naturally contradict each other. About Jesus' reappearance, Raymond Brown tells us, and I quote, "It is quite obvious that the Gospels do not agree as to where and to whom Jesus appeared after his resurrection." End of the quote. This is in his Bible commentary. If the disciples wrote the Gospels or supplied information for them, the Gospels should have agreed with one another, which they don't, and virtually every scholar agrees on this. In short, we can't trust these reports of who saw Jesus and where. Even when the Gospels try to show that Jesus did reappear, yet they show that he could not be positively identified. Matthew's Gospel says that disciples did see him and worshipped him, but some doubted. NASB says that they all doubted, while the Living Bible says that some of them were not sure that it really was Jesus. Jerriton can bring many arguments, and my responses will follow. But since we have proven now that the evidence for Jesus' resurrection is seriously flawed, every other argument fails. Hence, Old Testament prophecies failed, New Testament prophecies failed, and empty tomb proves nothing at all. Over to you, Habeeb.
Typing text or comments in the room would distract the speakers, and that is why we are, saying to refrain from typing or texting, so that our speakers can say what they wanted to say. So that's what we want. Sorry for that. Sorry for the inconvenience. You can ask your questions after the question answer session is over, or after the discussion is over. Thank you very much. Now, responding to what Saaib just said, Jerriton Brewin will respond to what Saaib just said now. Mic is free.
Well, yes. Regarding the, Brother Saaib mentioned several points. I don't think I can answer them in this time. He first said that, he said that even if it is possible that there is 0.0001% possibility that Jesus was not crucified and he did not die, Muslims can still escape and hold to their Muslim position. Well, this is simply not true. When historians do history, they don't do two things. First, they don't look at possibilities. And second, they don't look at 100% certainties. These are the two things that historians don't do. Historians look at the evidence and provide the best plausible explanation given the evidence. They don't go for possible explanations. If you go to, for example, Bart Ehrman, whom Brother Saaib Ahmed mentioned, and ask him, well, is it possible that Jesus did not die? Then Ehrman will admit that it is possible that Jesus did not die. But he will say that it is not plausible to suggest that because the evidence suggests otherwise. And he brought some of the arguments against the resurrection. I don't think I'll be having the time to answer it here, maybe in the closing speech. With regard to the Quranic position of the crucifixion of Jesus, as I've mentioned, the Quran is not going against the crucifixion of Jesus. The Quran recognizes that on historical grounds, it was the people who crucified Jesus. They were the cause on historical grounds for Jesus' crucifixion. But on theological grounds, the Quran is saying that God was the cause behind Jesus' crucifixion. And this is my interpretation of Surah 4, 157. But Brother Saaib said that nobody else interpreted it that way. So what? Muhammad himself did not give an interpretation of Surah 4, 151 in the authentic hadiths. So why do you want me to give? Why are you asking me not to give any interpretation? You have to give some arguments why my interpretation is wrong. You should not say simply that people in the old time did not interpret it that way. As I mentioned earlier, some Muslims believe that Jesus was crucified but he did not die, while others believe that Jesus was not crucified but died when God caused his death. And what I propose to do is to take these two Muslim views of the crucifixion. Notice that these are not my views of the crucifixion. These two views are Muslim views of the crucifixion. And what I am doing is I am blending these two views into one. And so my interpretation of Surah 4, 157, which I would like to offer my Muslim friends, is that according to the Quran, Jesus was crucified and he also died by crucifixion. And the reason which I would like to give for Muslims to embrace this interpretation is twofold. Number one, given the ambiguity of Surah 4, 157, which Muslims themselves admit, my interpretation is also a viable one. And number two, the crucifixion and death of Jesus carries a huge theological significance, which I've earlier mentioned. If I have the time, I could answer Brother Saaib's other questions, but Brother Habeeb, it is your choice.
Yes, okay, thank you. Please control your emotions, Essence. This is, please do not debate the speakers by laughing at them. You may remove the red dot now, Brother Saaib. Now let's go ahead further. How much credit does the Old Testament hold in this regard, and what actually does it say about the coming of the Messiah? Please talk us through the theology based on this.
Yes, thank you, Brother Habeeb. I'm sorry for the aggressive voice. Actually, I have a cold, so my voice is quite a bit rough. I'm sorry for that. With regard to the Old Testament, from the very beginning of nascent Christianity, Jewish Christianity, that began in Jerusalem within a few months after Jesus' death and resurrection, the Jewish Christians recognized that Jesus' death on the cross was, as it is reported in 1 Corinthians 15:3, in accordance with the scriptures. And the scripture which the Jews knew at that time was the Old Testament. Now, the key element that is to be kept in mind when reading the story of Israel in the Old Testament is that the story is not static. That is to say, the Old Testament is not about God telling his people, you do this and you will get so and so blessings, and you do that, watch out, you're going to be lost. Rather, it was dynamic. It is like God telling his people, you are a people whose story is going forward to reach a climax that will result in the whole world being blessed in and through you, Israel. This is the Abrahamic covenant. And this was how the Jews of the first century saw the Old Testament. For them, the Old Testament, and I mentioned this in my debate as well with Mr. Inamullah Mumtaz, the Old Testament was like a book in search of an ending. It was like a book that did not have the last one or two chapters at the end. And anyone who has read a novel will know that you won't get to know the climax of the story before you open the final chapter of the book. Yes, by reading the beginning chapters, you will get some clues that allow you to anticipate and speculate on how the story might end, perhaps with a twist or without a twist. But you won't actually get the "this is how the story will end" news at the beginning. Likewise, the Old Testament promises that God was going to rescue the world in and through Israel, but it leaves open the door to speculation as to how on earth God was going to do it. And that is why during the first century, the Jews had multifaceted expectations of the coming Messiah, who was supposed to bring Israel's story to the climax. And nobody expected the Messiah to die. Notice that the Old Testament does not say that the Messiah will not die. It was only that the people in the first century did not have any such expectations of a dying Messiah. There is no explicit reference of that in the Old Testament. And it was only after Jesus the Messiah had died and was raised from the dead did his followers reread the Old Testament in the light of Jesus' own death and resurrection, which is the climax of the story of Israel, and then discover that the whole of the Old Testament had been pointing and moving forward in the direction of reaching its focal point at the Messiah's death and resurrection. And the key passages which they saw as throwing light on Jesus' mission are Isaiah 52 to 55 and Daniel 7. Let me just give one thing about Isaiah 52 to 55. In Isaiah 52, it says, "How lovely on the mountains are the feet of the one who says to Zion, your God reigns." That is, your God is becoming king. And how does that come about? We go straight from the end of Isaiah 52 into Isaiah 53, which is the remarkable picture of the suffering servant who is the obedient representative of Israel, taking the weight of sin and sorrow upon himself, so that in Isaiah 54 there is the new covenant, and in Isaiah 55 there is new creation. So there you have it, the kingdom of God through the work of the servant, resulting in the total renewal of the covenant and then new creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerriton, for talking through the Old Testament. Now, what do you say about it, Saaib Ahmed? What does it say about the Messiah? And how do you interpret those verses?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. One of the basic premises upon which Christianity rests is that Jesus was Messiah predicted in the Jewish Bible. It is necessary to examine the Jewish understanding of Messiah to understand why such claims are simply not true. The literal and the proper translation of word Messiah is anointed, which refers to a ritual of anointing and consecrating someone or something with oil, like as in 1 Samuel 10 verses 1 to 2. It's used throughout the Jewish Bible in reference to wide variety of individuals and objects. For example, a Jewish king, as in King 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 39, Jewish priests, as in Leviticus 4:3, prophets, as in Isaiah 61:1, the Jewish temple and its utensils, as in Exodus 14 verses 9 to 11, or unleavened bread, as in Numbers 6:15, and to a non-Jewish king, as in Isaiah 45:1. Judaism has always maintained a fundamental belief in messianic figure, since the concept of a messiah is one that was given by God to Jews. Jewish tradition is best qualified to describe and recognize the expected messiah. The tradition has its foundation in the Bible. Judaism understands the Messiah to be a human being with no connotation of deity or divinity, who will bring about certain changes in the world and who must fulfill certain specific criteria before being acknowledged as the Messiah. According to Torah, the Messiah will be Jewish, as in Deuteronomy 17:15. He will be a member of the tribe of Judah, Genesis 49:10, and a direct male descendant of both King David, Chronicles 17:11, and King Solomon, Chronicles 20:10. He will build the third temple, Ezekiel 37:26-28. He will gather all Jews back to the land of Israel, Isaiah 43:5-6. He will usher in an era of world peace and end all hatred, oppression, suffering, and disease, Isaiah 2:4. He will spread universal knowledge of God of Israel, uniting the entire human race as one, Zechariah 14:9. In Christianity, the role of Messiah was redefined. As Jesus had not been successful at the very first place, the sudden death was explained by making him resurrect. The Bible was explained with the purpose of finding evidence that the Messiah would be killed without bringing peace to the world or redemption of Israel. There was therefore expectation of a second coming, at which Jesus would carry out the task expected of the Messiah, because he obviously did not do it at the first go. This also required creation of an explanation for the first coming and its catastrophic end. The net result of all this was to shift the function of Messiah from a visible level where it could be tests, as in Tanakh, what Christians call the Old Testament, to an invisible level where it could not. As a result of this reworking, the Messiah's goal the first time around was changed from redemption of Israel to atonement for original sin, a reworking of biblical themes. Under such reworking of themes, Old Testament has been misinterpreted and wrongly used by Christians to support their views. A beautiful example is that of Psalms 22:17. I quote, "Like a lion, there are at my hands and feet." The Hebrew word for "like a lion" is grammatically similar to the word that would be used by Christians to mean something else. Thus, Christians read the verse as a reference to crucifixion. They pierced my, I quote, "They pierced my hands and feet." End quote. Christians also claim that Isaiah 53 refers to Jesus, like Jerriton already said. Actually, Isaiah 53 direct follows the theme of chapter 15, describing the exile and redemption of Jewish people. Many a times a prophecy is fabricated and then Jesus is made to fulfill it. For example, Matthew 2:23 says, and I quote, Jesus came and resided in city called Nazareth, and that was spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. End of quote. Since a Nazarene is a resident of city of Nazareth, and this city did not exist during the time period of Jewish Bible, it is important to find this it is impossible to find this quotation in the Hebrew scriptures. At times, wrong translations are utilized, and then Jesus is made to fulfill the wrong interpretation. For example, in Romans 11:26, the Christian Bible quotes Isaiah 59:20 as saying, and I quote, "The deliverer will come from Zion; he will remove ungodliness from Jacob." End quote. Thus attempting to establish scriptural support for the Christian belief that the Messiah will take our sins. However, a careful examination of Hebrew originals reveals a powerful dilemma. Isaiah 59:20 actually says the opposite, and I quote, "A redeemer will come to Zion, and to those who turn from transgression in Jacob, declares the Lord." End quote. The Messiah's role is not to take away our sins, rather, when he turns away from our sins, the Messiah will then come. I can continue on and on and on with such examples. I would just say that Gospels are not history memorized, but
Thank you for stopping then. All right, now since we heard from both of you, uh, before we close, I think it would be very good to talk a little bit about the resurrection of Jesus. Now, Jerriton and Saaib are going to have a written debate on the same topic about resurrection. Can historians prove the resurrection of Jesus? So I would like to ask Jerriton to clarify his positions on why you think that the resurrection of Jesus has to be proven historically.
Yes, thank you, Brother Habeeb. Yes, one thing I would like to mention before going to the resurrection is that Brother Saaib said that the Messiah was only human. Jews thought that the Messiah was only supposed to be human and not divine. I think he has not read the intertestamental books. The book of Enoch and other intertestamental books clearly mentions the Messiah to be at least some sort of a divine figure. And in the first century, the Jews were expecting some sort of a divine Messiah to come. So that is a correction on there. And the reason why resurrection is important to be proven historically is twofold. First, the resurrection is what breathes theological life into the death of Jesus. Yes, I would agree with Saaib Ahmed that if Jesus had simply died, then that would have been a disconfirmation that Jesus was the Messiah. But it was only the resurrection that breathed theological life into the death of Jesus. Had Jesus not been raised from the dead, then his death would have been no more than a criminal's death. And the resurrection is the one that reversed the verdict issued by the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court. The resurrection gave the message that whether you like it or not, whether you, however well you interpret the Old Testament, Jesus is the Messiah because of the resurrection. As Paul puts it in Romans 1, Jesus was publicly announced and marked out, designated to be the Son of God in power by his resurrection from the dead. So the resurrection is what reversed the verdict, and that was how the Jews saw it. The early Christians were Jews. They knew the scriptures, and they saw the Old Testament in the light of the resurrection of Jesus. Second reason why the resurrection is important to be shown historically is that if the death of Jesus means the defeat of the forces of evil that prevented God's project of healing the world, then the resurrection of Jesus means that it is the beginning of that project of new creation. Jesus' resurrection is the beginning of God's new project, not to snatch people away from the earth to a place called heaven, but to colonize earth with the life of heaven. And in the future, heaven and earth will be joined together and will be made one. Think about Romans 8 and Revelation 21. And the good news of Easter, the resurrection, is that heaven and earth have already been united in Jesus' resurrection. Jesus' resurrection body was a blend of both the earthly nature, that is flesh and bones, as well as the heavenly nature, that is immortality and incorruptibility. Heaven and earth have been literally united in Jesus at his resurrection. And in the future, God will do for the whole cosmos what he had done for Jesus at his resurrection. That is what the kingdom of God is all about. It is not about private spirituality. Brother Saaib Ahmed said that the concept of Messiah had been changed from external things to eternal spirituality. No, the resurrection is about outside reality. It's about heaven and earth being joined to one that has begun in Jesus. And given 21st century post-modernity and the rise of science and reason, it becomes vital to proclaim this gospel as an intellectually viable option for thinking men and women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerriton, who has clarified his positions. Now, what are your positions and thoughts, Saaib?
Can you people hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. It was as if we were listening to a Sunday church sermon. Well, in any case, resurrection to be proven historically. Resurrection is that one thing which sets almost everything on track for Christianity. Notice what I had said earlier. The only escape for Christians, as if is if they argue that Jesus rose from the dead, and like they want us to prove historically the crucifixion did not happen. What I would tell them is to prove historically Jesus rose from the dead. Until such a proof is given, which surely can't be given, we can keep on believing that the idea of a crucified Messiah is as self-refuting as a square circle or a four-sided triangle or a married bachelor. So you see here, there that the proof for resurrection is very important. From the Christian perspective, it will serve other purposes as well. Christians believe that Jesus made some sweeping claims for himself. They believe that he echoed Yahweh's own statements with several "I am" declarations that also identify him with symbols of major significance, like the bread of life, as in John 6:35, the light of the world, John 8:12, the gate of the sheep, John 10:7, the good shepherd, John 10:11, the resurrection and the life, John 11:25, the way, the truth, and the life, John 14:6, the real wine, John 15:7. I don't know why do they come from John only. In any case, when we accept Jesus made such claims, we have two choices. Either he was right or he lied. Jesus is put on cross for his blasphemy, and if he rose again, it means God had accepted his claims to be correct. In this particular sense, the proof for resurrection is very important for Christians. However, we should note that Christians have been accepting resurrection since ages, and it's only a recent phenomenon among them to find a historical proof for it. And the proofs they provide are at best laughable and worth ignoring. And this will be put on test in our next debate. Over to you, Habeeb.
Thank you, Saaib. Now let's give it to Jerriton. What is the significance of the resurrection for you?
Well, to me personally, as a medical student, the resurrection of Jesus is highly significant because it provides the working context for my medical profession. Why do we commit our whole lives to serving humanity by doing our best to alleviate their pain and suffering if death marks the end of human existence, or if the ultimate goal in life was to leave this human body behind and go to heaven for eternity? But if God desires to eternally heal this earth from sickness and death, and if he has already launched his project in Jesus at his resurrection, then what I do as a doctor makes sense. I am part of God's project of healing the world. And as I've often told my colleagues in my college, Christianity and the medical profession share a common goal: health for all. You open the World Health Organization website and there you will find it, health for all. You open the Bible and read its climax, there you have it, health for all. And whether we doctors are doing our job or not, God has begun doing his job, and he has invited us to participate in his work of global healing. And as I fulfill my duty as a student of medicine to serve humanity, I am not only doing man's work, but I'm also doing God's work. So in short, why is the resurrection significant to me? Because it colors everything I do in my real life. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerriton. Now let's give it to Saaib. since Jerriton spoke about his significance, please Saaib go through why the resurrection is irrelevant to you or is not significant to you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Again from Jerriton, it seemed that it was like the Sunday church sermon. In any case, Jesus' resurrection is irrelevant to us. It provides nothing to a Muslim. If Jesus indeed resurrected, that would prove God's greatness, not Jesus's. God is all powerful and can do whatever he wants, unless and until it doesn't go outside the law of nature. If he wanted to raise Jesus from the dead, he could. There you see that it doesn't affect a Muslim's faith. Moreover, I would like to mention a few things here. Islam is the religion of human instincts, Din al-Fitr, and that's what puts it distinct as compared to other faiths. If you are sincere, you are a Muslim. Now you can be sincerely wrong or sincerely right. In any case, you are a Muslim. A Muslim's belief is on God. God is still uniquely singular even if the world changes. It doesn't depend on what Quran says or what Bible says. It doesn't depend on Muhammad's prophethood or Jesus' resurrection. I end it there. Over to you, Habeeb.
Thank you, Saaib. And with this question, it reminds me of the early exchange of papers between you people through the forum, through the, I think so, Interfaith Forum, Saaib's forum, on this very much same topic. And I have also been involved in some exchange of papers. What do you make out of it, Jerriton, and how's your experience with the discussions that went beforehand? And what do you think are the flaws in Saaib's arguments in those papers?
Well, yes, in Facebook we had a discussion, and as far as I can see, he thinks that since the resurrection is a miracle, historians cannot establish it as a historical hypothesis. But it has to be mentioned that this is an age-old objection by skeptics that have been dealt with extensively by Christians over the centuries, and I will respond to his objections in the debate we will be having, not here. I hold the position that at least some miracles that pass the criteria for historicity can be postulated as historical hypotheses. In relation to this, I would like to say that Brother Saaib asked me to provide some evidence for the resurrection. Although this is not the topic of this debate, I would like to quote the scholar C.F.D. Moule with regard to this question. This is what the scholar says, quote, "If the coming into existence of the Nazarenes, a phenomenon undeniably attested by the New Testament, rips a great hole in history, a hole the size and shape of the resurrection, what does the secular historian propose to stop it up with? The birth and rapid rise of the Christian Church remain an unsolved enigma for any historian who refuses to take seriously the only explanation offered by the Church itself." And so, contrary to what Saaib Ahmed thinks, many historians have recognized that if you pull out the resurrection of Jesus from the first century, then there appears to be a gaping hole in the middle of the first century, which no other alternative explanation can fit in comfortably. And one of the important books on this subject is the book by N.T. Wright titled The Resurrection of the Son of God. It is an 800-page volume book where he argues persuasively that the very origin of the church in first century Judaism is an argument in favor of Jesus' resurrection. So I would like to direct people to go there if they are interested. Thank you.
What about you, Saaib? What do you make out of the exchange of those papers?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Jerry normally goes with mainstream, but not when they disagree with him. The last reply he gave was one such example. Anyways, what do I make out of that exchange of papers? Jerriton Brewin is no doubt a knowledgeable person, but that knowledge seems to be coming from a few particular sources which are biased to the subject. Maybe William Craig Lane, Mike Licona, or Craig Evans, or Wallace. And his response to one of my papers on Quran was entirely copy pasted from Norman Geisler, another biased source. They are no doubt good scholars, but evangelical scholars having very much conservative ideas. Jerry also had a bit of arguing from the authority. Moreover, he only argues from authority when the authority seems to be agreeing with him. The moment the authorities disagree with him, what he does is parting ways and makes a separate argument. This was visible from his exchange of papers with me, when he continued to cherry pick scholars who agree with him, like he did in this discussion as well. Cherry picking a scholar from here, posting him as an authority, then a scholar from there, posting him as authority. Jerry makes long write-ups without responding to a single argument. In our exchange, he did exactly the same. After my exchange of papers with him, my belief got stronger that even that the proof of resurrection is not possible to be produced. Let us see what he does in our upcoming debate. I'm sure that he will quote a scholar from here, a scholar from there, when majority rejects his views. And when the majority accepts his views, he will say, I would go with the mainstream. This is what he normally does. Over to you, Habib.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion of the debate. Let's have the closing remarks, first by Jerriton, which will be followed by Saaib Ahmed.
Yes, thank you. Let me draw the threads of this discussion so far. We've been discussing about the historical Jesus, particularly focusing on the crucifixion of Jesus. And as I've pointed out in my debate with Sheikh Inamullah Mumtaz, there are 4 reasons why virtually 100% of New Testament historians concur that Jesus was crucified and that the process killed him. These 4 reasons, early attestation, multiple independent attestation both within and outside the New Testament, enemy attestation, and embarrassing attestation, are actually reasons to think that the crucifixion of Jesus is eyewitness testimony and is therefore reliable. And then we discussed about the Muslim position of the crucifixion of Jesus. I pointed out that by reading the same Quran, Muslims have come out with at least 3 contradicting views of the crucifixion of Jesus. And I then offered a fresh interpretation of the Quran, which is in line with what the Bible says, that Jesus was crucified and died as a result. And Brother Saaib Ahmed hasn't raised a single objection to my interpretation. He has simply said that nobody has accepted such an interpretation in Islamic history, which is hardly an argument against my interpretation. Then we talked about the Old Testament. I pointed out that when the early Christians said that Jesus' death was in accordance with the scripture, they were not referring to 1 or 2 proof texts from the Old Testament that predicted that the Messiah would die and rise again. Rather, and I've mentioned this in my debate with Mr. Mumtaz as well, according to the scripture meant that the long scriptural narrative of the story of Israel had reached its dramatic climax in the death and resurrection of Jesus. And Brother Saaib said that, yes, he mentioned Norman Geisler, whom I quoted in my Facebook post. Well, I made a quote. I said that this is what Norman Geisler said. I was not using his words as if they are my own. And it was a debate not on the crucifixion or resurrection of Jesus. It was about the Quran being God's word. So that is an irrelevant one. And next he accused me of arguing from authority. One thing that has to be said here is that an argument from authority is not a logical fallacy. A faulty appeal to authority or an appeal to false authority is a logical fallacy. And when I'm quoting scholars from here and there, I am picking scholars from the mainstream position. These are the scholars who are, these are the sample who represent the mainstream of scholarship. That is what I'm providing. And with regard to the resurrection, he said that mainstream scholarship rejects that Jesus rose from the dead. Yes, there is a reason for that. An argument for the resurrection of Jesus has 2 things. First, you establish what are the facts to be explained, and second, you provide the best explanation to the facts. In the first case, establishing the facts to be explained, the bias of historians don't come into play. They simply look at the historical evidence and provide good, valuable reasons. Whereas when you come to the second point, giving a plausible explanation for the facts, that is where the historian's bias and philosophical outlooks come into play. And that is why historians on philosophical grounds reject the resurrection of Jesus, not on historical grounds. So on historical grounds, the majority of historians agree that Jesus was crucified, that the tomb was empty, and that the disciples saw post-mortem appearances of Jesus, and that the original church came into existence. This is a view that is accepted by mainstream scholarship. Where they differ is the explanation that they offer, which is affected by their worldview. And yes, I still have a little bit time, I think. Yeah, he then went to say that the evidence for resurrection, that is not the topic for our debate. And the proofs of the resurrection, he said, is quite laughable. No, if you look at the debates that have been conducted on the resurrection of Jesus, you will see that the proof for the resurrection is very strong. Even let me just mention this. Pincus Lepid is a Jewish scholar. He is not a Christian, and he has concluded, based on the evidence alone, that Jesus was resurrected from the dead. He remained a Jew till his death, but he concluded that the evidence is convincing that Jesus was resurrected from the dead. So I would like to invite my Muslim viewers and listeners to look at the evidence for the resurrection, and it will change your life, because if the resurrection did really happen, then that breathes theological life into the death of Jesus, and it means that new creation has begun, and you are invited to share in God's new world that will come at the eschatology at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerriton. Over to you, Saaib, for your closing remarks.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Okay. This was nice little speech by Jerriton Brewin, and I did like it, but I would disagree with everything he said in it, except for one thing where he said historians are unanimous that Jesus didn't resurrect. So let's go with the mainstream then. Why a debate on the topic? In any case, he again copies a scholar from here and a scholar from there. I said earlier that he can make comments, and I will respond. Like for his empty tomb as a as a unanimous agreement of scholars. Well, then let me use the historical argument that earlier attestation is accepted, and then I'll tell him there is no early empty tomb in the earliest attestations of Paul. And similarly, I can argue on certain things. Well, then they are arguments. Anyways, my closing remark. On the onset, we Muslims should remember that the Quran doesn't make a historical argument against the crucifixion of Jesus. It only makes a theological argument from God's authority. And Jerriton accepts this. You can see it from his comments on the papers we exchanged. We should also remember that the Quranic position is not debatable because it does accept that it appeared as if Jesus had been crucified. Since it had appeared that Jesus had been crucified, all historic data suggests the same. Since the historic data suggests that Jesus had indeed been crucified, a historian will naturally reach the conclusion that Jesus had been crucified. Thus, for a Muslim to argue against crucifixion on historical basis is futile and will lead to nowhere. Messiah is incorrect as long as his resurrection is not proved, and such a proof can't be obtained. Let me summarize. 1. Messiah can't be killed. 2. Jesus is the Messiah. From these, Lord the Messiah. 2. Jesus was not crucified. Both Muslims and Christians accept that Jesus was the true Messiah. Hence, conclusion 1 is ruled out. We are left with the conclusion that Jesus was not crucified. That's what I conclude from today's discussion. As for us Muslims, we should welcome Western critical scholarship and get indulged in it, master it, and use it bring Christians out of the foul sofa of what Paul has given them. For this whole of the Western scholarship backs us. You can go through what recent scholarship has unveiled about the colorful history of the Bible and how the core of Christianity is damaged. You can go into early Christianity and see how modern scholarship helps us to show how Jesus was transformed from a prophet to God. At every step, you will see the claims which Islam makes getting verified. As a critique, I can assure you that religion of Islam can pass any criticism. So much strong is its foundation that you need not worry about any challenge facing it. In the modern scenario, what Muslims need to do is go back to education. Remember that Islam had an amazing, glorious and successful past, which no other religion on the face of earth has enjoyed. We are the genesis of modern civilization. The Islamic golden age can come back once again. The simplicity which Islam carries is enough for it to supersede all other isms. All you need is to be rational and logical. I hope this discussion opens the eyes of the listeners and increases their curiosity. Go home, work on it of your own, be sincere in your approach, reach a conclusion, accept the conclusion even if it goes against what your beliefs. Thank you, Habeeb Thaika, for being an awesome host. I thank you all, dear fellow brothers and sisters, for being a nice audience. May God bless you all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, both of you, and we have successfully finished this debate. Now to the question answer session. particular. If any of our audience has any questions to any of the speakers, please come up to the mic and address the speaker whom you want to talk to. Please mention the speaker whom you want to address, and then the question will follow. You can take the mic and answer Matt World and other people who are in this room. We are pleased to hear your questions. Mic is free.
Hello, can I be heard? Actually, this is right. Is my voice okay? Can I be heard? Mic check, please. All right. My question is directed to Saaib Ahmed. Actually, I have two questions for each one of them. One for Saaib and one for Jerriton. And my question to Saaib is this: that we read in the Quran in various places, such as in Surah 261, Surah 291, Surah 321, and Surah 312, Surah 381, Surah 383, Surah 4 verse 155, Surah 2 verse 87, Surah 5 verse 70, that Jews were the murderers of the prophets. Jews murdered their prophets, or Jews killed them. So, what is special? How special was Jesus that God had to save him from the hands of his enemies? If that is the case, why did not God save the rest of his prophets, whom the Jews killed? So, I hope you got my question. Did you get it? Did you get it, Saaib? Hello. Okay. So could you please answer my question? Thank you very much. Mic is free.
Can you hear me? All right. Bapi's question, it's James speaking through his ID Bapi. His question is that Quran claims that Jews did kill prophets and all, and why did God then feel that Jesus needed to be saved? Am I right, Bapi? Am I right, James? Is that your question? Okay. Uh, I didn't like remembered all the quotations you gave. I am standing on the top of the floor right now under the sky. I don't have a Quran in front of me to verify what you said, but in any case, I know that the Quran does say that the Jews did kill prophets and all. And yes, the Quran does say that Jesus was saved by God. So then your question is logical. So why did God chose Jesus to be saved? I don't know. That's God's decision. But here is one good reason that why should he have done so? Because Jesus' statements were taken to be to mean something else, which they should not have meant. And a second thing is he was the Messiah, and the Messiah, if he had died, he was proved that he was not a Messiah. So then to save him was an important thing. If he would have died, he would not have been the Messiah. And if he survived it, then he still is eligible as a Messiah. That's how I would answer it. But then God knows better what was the reason that he saved him. And another possible explanation is that for a mighty messenger of God to undergo such a humiliating death, it doesn't feel like good. So then that's one more reason that why God should have saved him. But in any case, what was the actual reason, God knows the best. Thanks.
Please go ahead, Bapi. Jerry, you can respond after when Bapi is done.
All right. First, I'd like to thank Saaib for addressing my question. And I have something in my heart for both of you. I would like to congratulate both Saaib Ahmed and Jerriton for doing well in this particular Q&A type debate. And it really educated me a bit, not a lot, but I'm educated a bit because you guys have been studying the things and which I'm not doing. Frankly, I should say. Anyways, let me ask my question to Jerriton. Jerriton, you although it does not have any relevance, it does not have any relevance to the subject of the debate. However, you did say that you do not believe on the original sin. So, could you please let me know that what, according to you, is the original sin, and what are the reasons that you do not believe on it? I hope Jerry got my question. Thank you very much. Mic is free.
Yes, thank you, Brother James, for those kind comments. And that question, although irrelevant, is very interesting. Generally, most Christians believe that Jesus basically came to die for, quote, the original sin. And what they mean by this original sin is that Adam and Eve sinned, and somehow their sins have been transported or transmitted to every generation. And so, irrespective of what good you do, this original sin is always going to stop you from reaching heaven. And so, Jesus comes and dies, takes the wrath of God and destroys the original sin, and therefore we can go to heaven. This is what many Christians believe. But actually, I also had this initial interpretation of this original sin. I believed in this doctrine, but my studies on the historical Jesus, and particularly the recent trend in scholarship about Paul, so-called new perspective on Paul, which is very unfamiliar to the world, but it is very strong in scholarship. It is rising very much in scholarship. And when we place Paul and the Gospels in the first century Judaism, we see that the concept of original sin is not in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. Rather, as I pointed out, Jesus' death is the defeat of evil. It is not God pouring his wrath on Jesus. It is the world pouring their wrath on Jesus and God accepting that wrath in Jesus. So Jesus is exhausting the forces of evil. We killed him. We thought we were the ones who were angry at him, not God. God was not angry at him. The closest you can get to that penal substitution theory is in Romans, where Paul says that God punished sin in the flesh of Jesus. The Bible does not say that God punished Jesus. The Bible says God punished sin, and the place where that punishment took place was the flesh of Jesus. So the original sin, as far as I see, is unbiblical, because of a genuine theology of the cross can be seen by recent scholarship, which sees Jesus' death as the defeat of evil, which is why I prefer the Christus Victor model of atonement rather than I'm not rejecting the penal substitution. There is a substitution involved, but I reject its caricature that God was an angry person who destroyed the innocent Jesus, like a angry teacher beating one of his students and telling, okay class, now that's okay. That is a caricature of the cross, and that is not what the Bible says. And in the video that that I'm going to upload, I'll be explaining this explanation of mine in great detail. So make sure you listen to that video as well. Thank you, Brother James.
So with that said, I think it's the end for today. Thank you very much to Brother Saaib and Brother Jerriton and the other people who have come to our room and listened.